For 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this tripartisan amendment has wide support across the political spectrum and is being co-sponsored by Ron Paul of Texas, Mr. Hinchey of New York, Mr. Kucinich of Ohio, and has been endorsed by a number of leading national organizations, including the U.S. Business and Industry Council, the Taxpayers for Common Sense, the Green Scissors Coalition, Public Citizen, Friends of the Earth, and the U.S. Public Interest Research Group. This amendment is simple and it is straightforward. At a time when this nation has an $8.2 trillion national debt, this amendment would simply prohibit the Export-Import Bank from providing corporate welfare to large oil companies for the development of oil and gas projects overseas. Mr. Chairman, in America today, there are proposals coming from the White House and the leadership of this institution to cut back on health care, to cut back on Medicare, to cut back on Medicaid, to cut back on financial aid for college middle-class students. And yet, if we don't have enough money to take care of the middle class and their needs, working families, lower-income families, I wonder why we have billions of dollars available to provide corporate welfare for the largest oil companies in the United States of America, companies that are receiving today billions and billions of dollars in profits. It is beyond comprehension that anybody in this institution could come forward with a straight face and say that the taxpayers of America should be providing loan guarantees and subsidies to corporations like ExxonMobil, which last year earned $36 billion in profits, more profits than any corporation in the history of the world. Company like ExxonMobil, which had enough money to pay out $398 million for a retirement package for their former CEO. That the taxpayers of this country, that middle-class families, that working families should be subsidizing the largest oil companies in the world who are receiving record-breaking profits, who are paying their CEOs huge compensation packages, is literally insane. We have real needs in this country. We have needs for our veterans, needs for education, needs for health care. If oil companies in America can't make a buck today without coming for corporate welfare to the taxpayers of this country, they are never going to make a buck. Since 1996, the Export-Import Bank has given more than $7 billion in loans and loan guarantees for oil and gas projects all over this world, including $1.3 billion to ExxonMobil and nearly $2 billion to our old friends in Halliburton, another company that is obviously in desperate need of taxpayer funds. Mr. Chairman, to add insult to injury, the top recipient, and I hope you hear this, of this corporate welfare is not even an American company. It is not even a privately owned company. I didn't know that my Republican friends were so supportive of state-owned nationalized industries. I learn something new every day. But the top recipient of this corporate welfare is Pemex, a wholly owned oil company of Mexico. Well, isn't that great that the taxpayers of America are subsidizing a wholly owned oil company of Mexico? Well, how about paying attention to some small businesses in America? At this point, I would reserve the remainder of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Arizona.
Mr. Chairman, I am the only speaker on our side, so when the gentleman is finished, I'll conclude.
Gentleman from Vermont.
Well, I would encourage I don't want to use all of our time. I'll reserve my time. I'd love to hear.
The only speaker on our side, I have the right to close, and if the gentleman finishes, I'll speak.
How many speakers does the gentleman have?
One, me.
Okay. I would yield 2 minutes to Mr. Hinchey of New York.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Vermont, for offering this amendment, which I think is very appropriate and very much to the point these days. But before I begin with that, I also want to express my deep appreciation to my friend and colleague on the other side of the aisle, Mr. Colby, the gentleman from Vermont, who is the chairman of the committee which is overseeing this bill. I want to just thank him for the good, sound, solid work that he has done, and I want to also tell him that I have very much appreciated having the opportunity to be associated with him in his work. I think he has done an extraordinary job in chairing this subcommittee on appropriations, and I think he's set an excellent example for his successor, whoever that may be. Of course, we hope that successor will be from this side of the aisle, but we'll wait and see what happens. In any case, whoever it is, the example that Mr. Colby has set is one that's important for all of us, and I thank him very much. Last year, the world's 5 biggest oil companies recorded a staggering $111 billion in profits. And for the first quarter of this year, these same companies have racked up about $28 billion in profits, which puts them right on track for even exceeding the record profits that they established last year. The contrast between big oil's prosperity and the economic conditions of the vast majority of Americans is very, very obvious and deeply divided. People all across this country are finding it more and more difficult to heat their homes, and they are finding it true that each week a bigger chunk out of their paycheck is going to pay for the gasoline that they need just to get back and forth to work. So Americans are getting gouged twice. They're getting gouged at the pump, and they're getting gouged in their tax bills. They're getting gouged twice, once at the pump and again in the context of their tax bills. So what this amendment does is begin to focus attention on this situation where we are subsidizing American oil companies who are making record profits to go off and spend the taxpayer's dollar to develop energy sources in some other part of the world. It just doesn't make any sense. They have more cash on hand right now than they know what to do with, and now we're providing them with additional subsidies. So I thank the gentleman from Vermont for giving us the opportunity to vote on this amendment, to establish some clarity here with regard to how we use these funds. The kind of corporate welfare that is exemplified here in this particular example of taxpayers' dollars going to the richest companies in the world, making the biggest profits in the world, is just another example of how we have misallocated the taxpayers' dollars in this country, denying them the things they need in order to subsidize the coffers of people who don't need it. Let's pass this amendment.
Bill expired. Gentleman from Vermont has 3 minutes remaining.
Mr. Hinchy, do you need any more time? No, I guess not. Okay. Let me take the remaining time. I gather many of my friends here are strong proponents of the free enterprise system. They like the idea of risk, venture taking. And I wonder why it is that when the Export-Import Bank is supposed to be the place of last resort, when large oil companies like ExxonMobil are supposed to go to the banks, I wonder why the ExxonMobil is not going to Citibank or other large banks to get any assistance they might need. It is beyond comprehension to me that ExxonMobil and Halliburton cannot get a loan from the private sector. Beyond belief. Furthermore, I find it unbelievable, to be honest with you, as to why the taxpayers of this country are subsidizing a state-owned industry in Mexico, Pemex, their state-owned oil company, when certainly my friends over there would never think in a million years of subsidizing a state-owned oil company in the United States of America. So here's the bottom line, my friends. Historically, the Export-Import Bank has been a major provider of corporate welfare to the largest corporations of America. There are corporations who have received huge amounts of help from export-import, and then they say, oh, thank you very much, taxpayers of America. By the way, we're shutting down plants in this country and we're moving to China. And now what we're looking at is one segment of their loans and loan guarantees to the oil industry. Thank you, taxpayers of America, for subsidizing us, and now we're going to charge you $3 for a gallon of gas while we earn record-breaking profits. Mr. Chairman, this amendment should in fact be passed unanimously. It is beyond belief, would be beyond belief to the people of this country that there's anyone here who thinks the taxpayer money should go to the oil industry, which is enjoying record-breaking profits while they rip off the American people. I would hope we have widespread support for this amendment, and I would yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona.
Well, Mr. Chairman, in fact, I think this